Many of you will have seen the film drama The Windermere Children and the documentary In Their Own Words recently, and will have heard the name Calgarth mentioned a few times as the place where the 300 child survivors stayed when they arrived in the Lake District in 1945. For those whose curiosity led them to look for Calgarth near Windermere on the map, then you would have been disappointed and possibly a little bit confused. The houses and hostels where the children stayed are long gone. But this leads me neatly into introducing the following documentary, Route to Paradise. As many of you will know, in the summer of 1945, 300 child Holocaust survivors flew from Prague in the Czech Republic to Cumbria in the north of England to continue to rebuild their lives after unimaginable horror. The documentary that you're about to see was made in the summer of 2019 by Thomas Gardner and a team of young people from Windermere. It offers a glimpse into what was a remarkable archaeology dig that took place at what was the site of Calgarth Estate, the actual place where the child survivors stayed near Windermere when they were brought to the Lake District. They lived side by side with the local community that was still living on the estate after the end of the Second World War. Now, this was a community that was so friendly to the children when they arrived that one of them, in a bewildered way, turned to one of the dedicated team of support carers who had come here from London to look after them and asked her, "Who are these other people?" The carer replied, "These are ordinary working class English people being kind to you." And the Jewish child responded with these words, "These are good people and this is a good country." And given what the children had lived through during those past few years, this must have felt like paradise. And in fact, that's a description often used by them even today when they look back to those times. We now know that a number of the child survivors were placed in hospitals as far north in the region as Blencathra and as far south as Grange-over-Sands. And a number of others were placed in hospitals including in Kendal and in the nearby Ethel Headley Children's Hospital that was near Windermere. But we also know that the vast majority of them stayed in a number of hostels on Calgarth Estate. Now, these hostels had been used to house workers for the nearby Short Sunderland factory at Whitecross Bay. The factory had been built on the shores of Windermere during the Second World War as a secret location to build the famous flying boats, which were sorely needed to defend Britain. Now, the estate and the factory were demolished in the 1960s, and the land where Calgarth had stood was returned to farmland. But a few years later, a new school, the Lake School, was built there, and it was the school sports fields that became the focus for this archaeology and where we were to look for the ruins of Calgarth Estate, which had remained hidden for over 50 years. The archaeology initiative was projected to cover 2 years, 2019 and 2020, with special displays and commemorations this year, 2020, to coincide with the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, and also special events to mark the 75th year since the child survivors came to stay here in 1945. But unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic has put paid to those plans, but we can still share some remarkable moments with you, including this documentary. Our Tom and his team were commissioned by ourselves, the Lake District Holocaust Project, and as part of that initiative, some of them even visited Auschwitz for the first time. Now, their documentary tells the story of the archaeology of Calgarth and shines a light on its significance to the region and to the country. So my thanks to Tom, to his team, to the archaeologist, to the people of Calgarth, the people of Windermere, the survivors and their families, and to the school children, students and young people who came from far and wide to become involved in what was an amazing archaeology experience. So keep safe, keep well, and hopefully we'll see you all again in the Lake District very soon. Meanwhile, here is the Route to Paradise documentary just for you.
From 1933 to 1945, Nazi Germany persecuted, imprisoned and murdered approximately 6 million Jews, as well as nearly 5 million other minorities.
B7608. That was my name and that was my number.
After the liberation, 300 Jewish children were flown from Prague to a fresh start in England. Arriving in Windermere, they stayed at the Calgarth Estate and had a new lease in life.
It was a wonderful, wonderful place, and I'll never forget it.
It's a glimpse into a different kind of world and the possibilities of a world, of how it could be.
Now 74 years after the Holocaust, we are going to discover something of such a large scale and significance to Cumbrian history, and how lessons can be learned to prevent the past from occurring in the future.
The famous lakes here in Cumbria have given our national park international fame. As the Earth's climate changed over the millions of years, it has been a sea, a mountain range, a swamp and a desert. The landscapes have taken its present character over the last million years, with the Ice Age glaciers gouging out the valleys and creating the lakes nearly 12,000 years ago. But I don't want to go that far back into our history. I want to go back 75 years to 1945. The Second World War is over, Europe lays in ruins, and 300 Jewish children wait in Prague for their new life in England. And it's down there that a part of Cumbrian history will be discovered. At the end of the Second World War, the British government agreed to take in 1,000 orphan child survivors of the Nazi concentration camps. Only 732 could be found, and out of those 732, 300 of those became known as the Windermere Boys. Calgarth Estate was made up of 200 houses for 200 families. There were also 6 hostels to accommodate the 300 single workers without families. These workers worked at the nearby flying boat factory. When the war ended, the 300 workers vacated the hostels when their work was complete. These hostels were the Windermere children's first homes since liberation. For the next 2 weeks, a specialist team of forensic archaeologists will be surveying and excavating the site of the former Calgarth Estate, now home to the Lake School. In one of the school's sports fields, the team begin to scan the ground for potential areas of interest, using specialised equipment such as the GPR machine. Once those areas have been located, the archaeologists will start excavating, in an attempt to find items linked to the time when the Windermere children were here.
This was Broadfield Road. When the children came, they actually drove them along Broadfield Road, which is it looks like a farm track, and this is where the Jewish were offloaded from the buses that had come from Crosby on Eden. And we do have a couple of people around who can remember them getting off the buses. It was it was a summer's evening. It was the first of them arrived probably towards dusk. The last of the buses came in the dark in the early hours of the following day. but they offloaded here. For many of them, they were taken into their different hostels, allocated different hostels, huge excitement and everything. But it was next morning when they woke up, having a good night's sleep, and they stepped outside, that they actually saw where they'd arrived. When the buses came in, they brought them from Crosby on Eden. We don't know, we think it was the boys, but it may have been locals as well, were waving torches to welcome them in. You can imagine if you go back to the concentration camps, when you arrived in places, torches flashing, you know, so it was quite intimidating.
The project leader of this excavation is Professor Caroline Sturdy Colls. World renowned for her forensic archaeology, herself and her team were responsible for discovering Star of David tiles, believed to line the gas chambers of the notorious Treblinka extermination camp in Poland. Norman Shepherd was a flight engineer of the RAF Squadron 196. The 196 already had an impressive war record. Taking part in Operation Market Garden and the D-Day landings, they had one final mission. Norman was on the Sterling aircraft that brought the children from Prague to England. The documents shown here relate to his squadron's flight that brought over the children from Prague. He's seeing them for the first time in 75 years.
Displaced people to Prague and children from Prague to Crosby. Several of us live here now.
When you first met the children, what did you say to them?
Well, we was a little bit surprised because these children came on board and I had to seat them with no seats in those days, no safety belts or anything like that. I had to sit on their belongings. And I think we had 12, 15 there. And so getting ready for flight. So I told them to stay still, don't move around there. The airplane keys, you know, well, I couldn't speak English. They spoke in English, but emphasised to signs. And they had to go forward for takeoff because that's one of my busiest times, takeoff, with the fuel and everything else, engines and all that. So after I was airborne for about 10, 15 minutes, I put all the instruments on combat mode, so if anything happened, they want to get worried. So I went back and these, well, by the way, before we went off, give these boys a bar of chocolate each, these children of it, and came back and they'd sticked all over the aircraft, all over and I said, what the heck's going on there? And they were angry voice, I suppose, because they couldn't understand what I was saying, and they all cowered. You know, all cowered together, thought I was going to go and beat them up or something like that. And I said, no, if you help me to clean up the mess, which they did, and after it finished, they all came and put their arms around me, kissed me and everything else, you know, because they never had any affection, I suppose, with where they'd been for the past 5 or 6 years.
So this is our first day with everybody on site, and we have decided to put in an additional 2 more trenches. They're 5 metres each, and the reason is we want to try to establish the extent of the main hostel building. We believe that it was probably about 10 metres across, so by putting 2 trenches in, we're then able to hopefully catch the outer edges.
So that's that one. I mean, I'll send it back to the office there.
The archaeologists are looking at results which came from a scan of where we think the hostels were. These images on the screen show evidence of the Calgarth Estate reappearing into the present day, a sight not seen in half a century.
It is. Well, yeah, the asphalt is there. But that's 100 nanoteslas there. So this is the small area to the north of the larger area. Okay. So we do have a track or something coming through there.
Yeah.
And there is a broad area of response, but it does start to go away. I think that looks like the track. There's supposed to be a track there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking earlier. But I think that's quite large. I don't know how large the buildings you're looking for are, but
They are big.
Towards the end of the first week of excavations, the archaeological team discovered a very interesting item in one of the test pits.
In this section here, we've got obviously the various layers. We've got the turf on top, and then our mixed kind of leveling layer here, and then within it all of these bricks. But also we've got a eating fork just sticking out of the side there, and it looks as if it could be quite complete, and it's heading into the edge of the trench. So really want to be quite careful with it and not just pull it. So I would want to extend the trench so we don't damage it.
I'm a former pupil of the Lake School, and I have very fond memories of learning history in this building. When I was 14 years old, Arik Hirsch came to the school to talk to students about his time in the concentration camps. It was this time, 8 years ago, that my journey with the Lake District Holocaust Project began.
We walked on and we came to a brick building. We told to take our clothes off, and I had 6 photographs of my family. That was the last time I've seen my family, what they look like. I had to put everything on the floor, and we went into the next room. We had our hair shaved off, and next room we got a shower. The first shower in 6 months I had, and then we got our striped uniforms, and I also got my number on the arm. B7608. That was my name and that was my number. Anytime they wanted me, they called me by the number. And they still had time to take us out. They took us to Weimar, 8 kilometers away. It was a town.
Emptied the camp of all the prisoners.
Yeah.
And took them to Weimar.
Yeah, and they put us onto a train, open train, no roof, and they started shunting us around for a whole month on open trains.
Now this train was going absolutely nowhere.
Unbelievable.
It was going up and down and round and round. The prisoners had no protection from any bad weather. They only had, if they were lucky, a blanket and no food.
And we were shot by the American Air Force. They came down, swooped over the train, they shot, and then they stopped right away. They noticed our uniform, our clothing.
And so one day the guards, while this train is going round, decided that they would make some soup for the prisoners. And they deliberately put so much salt in this soup that even though they were starving, they couldn't eat it.
No.
So this was the mentality, this cruel mentality of the guards, that they treated the prisoners a punishment on top of a punishment. And I have to ask any of you girls and boys, how hungry have you really got to be before you start eating your shoes? Because this is what Arik was reduced to. He took his shoes off one day when the train stopped to take some bodies off the train and bury them. He made a small fire and he burnt the leather so that he could break it off, and he chewed his shoes.
Yeah. And for a whole month we were on an open train. 4 days later we were liberated by the Russian army, and we were liberated, and actually I did survive. For a whole month on open wagons, rain, snow, all sorts of different things we had. We had grass. I've seen cannibalism on that train. Horrendous situation.
And the Russian soldiers were absolutely appalled when they came into Theresienstadt.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe what they were seeing, the condition of these poor prisoners. And so they had to lay mattresses all over the place because there was no proper hospital. and they were dying from typhoid and dysentery. One can only imagine the shocking situation it was.
Yep.
And they brought, Eric said, big cauldrons of rice pudding.
For a whole month?
For a whole month, they fed the patients with rice, would not allow them to eat anything else.
At the end of the first week, the archaeologists have measured and scanned the site and have extended their trenches to start locating areas of interest picked up from the GPR machine. With students from Staffordshire University joining the team at the start of the second week, the archaeologists are keen to locate items associated with the Calgarth Estate and items possibly belonging to the Windermere children. This is Billy Moffett. He was a ploughman in the 1950s and was the first to plough over what was the Calgarth Estate. It's only now that the land is beginning to reveal its secrets.
So did you live on the estate then?
Now what we did, when the farm was running,
Yeah.
my father used to come round thrashing the corn.
Right.
And then as time went on, this job came up. And he put his name down for this job and he got the contract.
Oh, right,
And reinstated it all.
And did you work with him then? Is that
Yes.
how you
I
got
was
involved?
only about 16 then.
And
so-
where were you living at that time then?
On Natland Road in Kendal.
You were living there then? And,
Yes.
And you had to come this far to
We
do all
come
this
every
work?
morning, yes.
Do you remember what happened when they took it down? Do you remember anything about?
That's what our job was actually.
Yeah, you just put it
No,
down as
we
well?
didn't pull it down, but what we did, after it was all the wood, the stone that was taken away, it was put back to agricultural land.
Right,
And we had the job, contract job, of ploughing and reseeding it.
right.
The dig has gone remarkably well. We've had some amazing findings. We've found objects, traces of the buildings that the children who came to Windermere lived in. We've been so fortunate to be able to meet survivors and to work alongside their families and amazing volunteers who've really invested in telling the history of this really important site.
So it's been a pretty successful excavation so far. We've found lots of objects and artefacts that we're quite excited about. Slightly different to normal archaeological objects that we find. So we're used to finding Roman pottery and prehistoric pottery, but here we are talking about things that date to 1945, 1946, 1947. I suppose the finds really can be separated out into two main categories. They're the categories associated with the buildings themselves that we were looking for. So these are structural evidence of how the building functioned, how it worked, how it might have looked, so the visual appearance. So, and then other personal objects, which we've got to try and trace and figure out what sort of date these things were used. So this is quite an unusual one. So this is a curly top hair gel that's designed for infants. So this would have been put on infant's hair to make it go curly. So again, we don't know the date of that, but it could well be maybe 50s, late 50s for that one, given the design on it. And then we have important objects, so the things which we might not expect to find on an archaeological site, even if it dates to 1945. So here you see a little bit of window glass, which is, again, in itself not that important, but obviously the window glass, as you can see, has had newspaper stuck onto the inside, looking outwards. So again, newspaper is something which isn't preserved at all well. So to actually find the preservation conditions well enough here to preserve newspaper is actually quite good. So what we can do again is try and trace that to see what they might have felt was important enough to stick on their window of their house. And then probably the key find, it was probably one of the first that we found during the excavations actually, and this is a little unicorn, probably a pendant. So obviously this is undoubtedly belonging to a child. So we've looked at the dates of some of these designs, these overall designs. They date to the late 30s, early 40s, which is sort of the time that we're looking at here. So we can't say that this definitely belonged to one of the children when they were brought over into the chalet hostel here, but
you know, it's certainly a possibility that we'll do further research on them.
So the artefacts will now go and be conserved. Some of them require specialist conservation to make sure that they remain stable now that they're out of the ground, and then the rest will be archived until such a time that an exhibition will be created. So hopefully in the not too distant future they'll be on display here in Windermere.
Here we are on the final day of the dig part of the project, the excavation, the surveying and excavation. We stand here in the middle of what ostensibly is the sports field, the main sports field for Lake School. You can see a little bit of where some backfill has gone in for a small test pit, which is where one of the hostels was positioned, where the boys came. Although we now know that the boys actually called them the chalets. So that was where the boys' chalets block was. And if we turn just to our right, you can see there's still some excavating and test pits being dug. That was another hostel, and this is the one we sort of knew about. We weren't sure the exact location. Half of this emerges into sports field. The foundations of the rest of it actually disappear under the school, but we always knew about this one. Interesting from where I am, I know that if the hostel was there and a hostel here, by my estimates, I would think we're standing right now in the sick bay. The curious thing is that the blackboard, even though they are ill in the sick bay, a lot of the guys that came were suffering from different forms of illness, ill health. They were supposed to be in 100% grade A physical condition and supposed to have been in quarantine for 2 or 3 weeks so as apparently not to be bringing diseases into the country. But there was a well-known incident, several well-known incidents of a medical officer at Theresienstadt whose job was to assess the physical condition of the children before they came, the young people. And we know through Minia and through Maya, who passed away, both of them sadly gone now, that he looked at them up and down and passed them fit to travel. We have quite a lovely story that another of our boys, Koppel, who passed away a few years ago, but Koppel told us the story of being on the aeroplane in Prague, and he was on the actual aeroplane en route to the Lake District, Crosby on Eden, and they were taught on the aeroplane the English word sorry, his first English words of sorry, and they were told that just learn the word sorry. Whatever you do when we get to England, whatever mischief you get up to or whatever things you do, just say sorry and the English will forgive you. The English love the word sorry. It's a glimpse into a different kind of world and the possibilities of a world, of how it could be.
Okay, I'll do a clap just to sync the audio for the microphone. Okay. All set?
Well.
Okay, so could you tell me what was...
Sam Gontarz was just 9 years old when the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939. In 1944, he was separated from his brother and sent to Auschwitz on his own. Surviving 5 concentration camps, Sam became a very close member of the 45 Aid Society, a charity established in 1963 by the Holocaust survivors themselves.
I was already on my own, and I didn't know whether my rest of the family survived or not. And I thought to myself, I've got to survive, and I've got to go along with it, to adapt. I met somebody that we became very, very friendly in Auschwitz, actually, before we marched out. He was also from Lodz. But it's very interesting about him. His name was Gene. And we became very friendly. We did things for each other, but we never spoke to each other. Not a word. I wasn't aware of that until Robbie asked me certain questions after, obviously, in recent years. What did you talk about? And then it came to me, we never talked about anything. And I can't understand up to today how we managed to be such good friends and not talking. All I knew, he's from Lodz, but it wasn't until we were liberated that we started getting close, where he's from, which school he went to, where he lived and all this. That became clear after we got liberated.
The excavation of the former Calgarth Estate was a really important project for Cumbria. The evidence found here gives the UK an important site with its most direct link to the Holocaust. Work like this is a further step forward to educating the younger generations about the Holocaust, of genocide, and how lessons like these can prevent the rise of the rhetoric of hate, and to love one another the way it should be.